Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. We're here to do a little recap of regionals. We're also going to look ahead to super regionals. It's going to be a little bit of a mixed bag here in terms of looking back and also looking forward. We're going to try to do both in an effective way. And before we get to that, I have to remind you that this episode of Weekend Waypoints Highway to Hoover is brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors. The sun's out and the fun is on at Academy Sports and Outdoors. Score a cool pool, savor summer flavor with a grill, prep for fishing weekends, or mount up with a new mountain bike. However you have fun, you can't lose with our top brands. Gear up online at academy.com or at your local store. All right, Mark. I just wanted to kind of talk the discussion kind of generally with, that there was so much, you get 13 teams from the SEC into regionals. There's an expectation that the hosts will more or less hold serve and will probably have some of these 2s and 3s win regionals and pull upsets, at least on paper. And it wasn't that. It was a disappointment. There's no other way to put it. I think on the whole, it was a disappointing weekend for the SEC. I don't think there's any way around that. I'm just kind of curious what your reaction was to that. Since you were home and doing the command center approach, you actually probably dug in a little bit more to regional sites than I did, where I was in Auburn, so it was hard for me to follow as closely. But what were your general reactions to the weekend that was, considering it just kind of fell flat?
Yeah. I think that the first thought is that expectations were so high. One, because of historically how well the SEC's done in the postseason. Two, because of this season. I felt like that maybe there was a gap between the top teams, and many of those are in the SEC, and some are not. Some are in the ACC and elsewhere, and everyone else. Because of the portal, because of NIL, it felt like, in my mind, there had been differentiation between those tiers, and that did not bear itself out this weekend. One of the things, obviously, you have the top 4 overall seeds. You have 6 of the top 7. You had 14 of the top 16. You had 12 of the at-large bids, all coming from the SEC. So there was an expectation that you'd at least have 7 advance. That's what I set the bar at. And when I sent a tweet out saying, okay, this is what I'm setting it at 7, and people thought I was crazy for not having it higher. And then, only 4 advance. So the difference between our expectations and reality was jarring, more so than the individual losses. Now, when you look at the individual test cases of what transpired, if I would have told you, Joe, that Texas was going to lose a regional, you would have probably thought, well, they must have had to go through the losers bracket, and that lack of pitching depth came back and bit them. That's probably what you would have said, right? If Vanderbilt, if I told you Vanderbilt was going to lose in a regional, you probably would have thought, well, that offense that had that had really, I guess, kicked it into another gear during the latter half of the season, reverted back to an early season form, or they didn't get those clutch hits that had carried them during the latter half of the year. That's probably what you would have said, right?
Yep.
Georgia. If I told you Georgia was not going to advance from a regional, you would have probably said, well, they didn't throw enough strikes, and they didn't get the clutch outs late in the game, and they didn't hit enough home runs to overcome that. Okay?
Yep.
That's what happened. Ole Miss. All year we've wondered, okay, do they have enough pitching? It looked like during this late stretch in the year that they had figured it out, that they had gotten better on the mound. But honestly, this weekend, they didn't get enough outs. It's just, they scored enough runs. They just couldn't pitch well enough. So that in itself, not surprising, right? But putting it in totality, and you put all those things together, all of those things happening, that was surprising, right? That kind of all of those paths that really weren't that, far fetched to occur, but you don't think they're all going to happen in one weekend, and they did. I think the other part, and I'm monologuing here, so interrupt me if you need to. But the other part of this is that I felt like some of the non-host would make a run that a Florida who had played so well down the stretch that they would be they would be in the mix. They didn't even make the regional final because they got nothing out of Liam Peterson and Pierce Capola. All right, two of the better pitchers, that with proven track records, they just didn't throw strikes, and that cooked them. Then you look at an Alabama team that felt like they should have hosted. They had a really good RPI. They lost two really close games because they left a ton of runners on base, and their opponent in each game, whether it was Miami or Southern Miss, made the big plays, got the big hit, made the big pitch, where Alabama didn't. Okay. And I think you put all of that together, and none of it is particularly surprising individually, but in totality, all of that happened in the same weekend. Just reiterates the point that gap, because you didn't have, quote, the elite super team that we sometimes get. There just wasn't enough there to offset not playing your best game.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with all of that. I think that's all spot on, because I think it's a lot of things. I think one of the other things, if you look at the big picture, is I have to think that part of this weekend is also a result of the way the SEC shook out this year, which is that you had two teams that were both historically bad record-wise.
Mm-hmm.
You had two teams that won a combined 8 SEC games. And if you played both of those teams, especially since Mizzou got all of its 3 wins against the same team, right? So the other 27, they put up no resistance. And then South Carolina had the 5 wins. If you played both of those teams, then, I mean, that was like 5 wins easy and probably 6, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how you end up with, I think, Ole Miss played both of them, I think, right? And so, like,
yeah, but Ole Miss lost at South Carolina, lost that series.
True, that's fair. That's maybe not a great example, but my point was going to be, my point more generally is that, if you played one or both of those, I don't want to say they're free wins, but they kind of were. And so you do wonder if, in not every case, but in some of these cases, teams were just maybe inflated to a point that was just above where they should have been, right? Where, some of these host teams that lost, if they're further down kind of the scale, maybe it's not so surprising or what have you, or I don't know. That's just me spitballing. But I do wonder if, because we'd really have to sit here and go line by line and say, like, okay, instead of going 5-1 against Mizzou and South Carolina, what if they'd gone 3-3, like in a normal year, with an average Mizzou and an average South Carolina? We'd have to really sit there and go through with a fine-tooth comb, and I don't want to do that. But just generally, I do wonder if there are certain instances of teams that, because they got, 3 or 4 more wins than they'd normally get from those 2 series, got kind of maybe bumped up past where they maybe needed to be, because we talk about in this league that the difference in hosting and a team wanting to fire its coach is kind of like 4 wins sometimes. Yeah. So that can make a big difference in where you are in the pecking order.
Yeah. I agree with all that. I think the other piece of this, and this isn't just an SEC thing, because, I mean, Clemson lost and Oregon lost, and there are others out there that didn't have the year they wanted. I feel like with the way the portal has changed the sport, and so many of the players are being consolidated up to this top tier, you would anticipate that having a greater impact, and there'd be less there would be less parity, right? And all those players would make a difference. Losing all those players from the mid majors would certainly help the top tier, but we didn't see that this weekend. And if I'm one of those big donors and I'm writing big NIL checks and I don't get a return on investment, meanwhile, these other teams that really have little to no NIL, a lot of times they're still in the traditional model. They might not be fully funded. They're certainly paying their way to play baseball, and they're winning regionals or knocking your team out of a regional. I've got to take a really hard look at how I'm constructing rosters And I've got to understand, okay, we're stacking talent and it looks good from a professional perspective, but where are my results? Because I'm not paying these players to become future pros. I'm paying them to help my team win regional games, okay, and advance in the postseason. And that, in some cases, that didn't happen. So, granted, it's small sample size at this point, but as we go forward, it's going to be fascinating to watch because I could see some really difficult conversations occurring. Okay, you're wanting me to pay, $500,000 to bring in this superstar player, and then what happens if we go 1-2 in a regional? Okay, so meanwhile you're losing to teams that aren't doing that. So that to me is going to be that's a new challenge that the programs are having to face that didn't really exist a few years ago.
Yeah, and I think relative to the portal too, I think this will be my last thing on this. We can move on to actual results, but I also think I've said this before. I also think that there was a first mover advantage with some, not all, but some SEC teams just deciding, hey, whatever this portal thing is, like we'll figure it out on the back end, but for now we're just going to grab players out of it. LSU did that, Tennessee did that, A&M did that. That first mover advantage is gone. Like whatever the 2025 version of Tommy White at NC State is, like another NC State example, Ty Head, starting center fielder. He's a freshman. He's our leadoff hitter. He's the best position player on the team. Like, let's just say he's that. Like, they are not losing that player now,
right,
in a way that they did back then, because so much of the country, even good programs, were caught so flat-footed. So the teams that were willing to say, like, yeah, we don't exactly know how it's going to work, but we're just going to go in here and start grabbing guys. They had a big advantage. And I do think that door has closed. Now, they still have advantages in terms of NIL and the attractiveness of playing in the SEC and the facilities and what have you. So it's not like they don't have advantages, but gone is the advantage where you're just negotiating against yourself, basically, when it comes to player acquisition. Those days are gone. So I think that's one element. And then I think another thing too is that I think we've entered as a reaction to the transfer portal. When you get matched up with mid-major teams, it used to be there was kind of a mix of, yeah, you'd get some teams that were older, but you also just had mid-major teams that were talented and got hot and what have you. And now it seems, and this is anecdotal, I'll be very clear, the mid-major teams that get into regionals and have these really good records, like a Murray State, for example. It's not a perfect example because they do have some newer players, but they do tend to be old teams that have been together a while. And I do wonder if that, because mid-major teams are just getting ransacked, not all of them, but a lot of them are getting ransacked every offseason. The ones that rise to the top of their leagues, especially pretty decent leagues like the Missouri Valley, you kind of have to be old because no one else is. So that's rising them to the top. So what you're getting in regionals with those 4 seeds now is oftentimes an old team have been together. They've got chemistry. They're mature, all that kind of stuff. And I wonder if that plays a role too, that you're getting a more quality 4 seed because the only teams that are capable of winning those conferences now are the ones that have been able to cobble together their roster over 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah, and certainly there's something to be said for having that chemistry and having that fit. The flip side of that is if they were more talented, they wouldn't still be there, right? Because someone would have offered them just something they can't turn down. Right. And that's the part that's, I guess, confusing for a lot of people watching, is you have this talent level up here, on a lot of these SEC teams. I mean, the teams they were losing to, in some cases, there's no one in that starting 9 who would have played for them, but they still didn't handle it, right? And that's going to be the confusing piece going forward, is what's the balance between keeping your chemistry, not recruiting over players, not causing hard feelings, but having enough talent on the roster to withstand injuries and underperformance and homesickness and anything else that could come up to disrupt your roster, because the teams that are, or the programs that are going to be able to be successful in this new world are going to have to master that. Otherwise, you're just going to keep throwing talent at it, and at some point, that has I feel like it has a negative effect because everyone is not developing and working together. It's all about the individual contributor as opposed to the team.
That's all good. I think it's one of those things that the dynamics there's just so many, like, we're just never going to know. It's all hypothetical. It's one of the great mysteries of this sport and all collegiate sports and what have you, is that roster building has never been more different and varied, and yet we seems like we know less and less. Mm-hmm. Let's get into some of the actual results of the weekend and do some looking ahead here. We're going to start with the Fayetteville Super Regional. That's the obvious place to start here, considering it involves two SEC teams. And also, I have to imagine, now there are some other examples, Auburn and Coastal Carolina is one, Oregon State, Florida State is one, but there are vanishingly few super regional matchups between regional one seeds left in this field. And I think for both teams, they're probably looking at this matchup and going, really, we're the ones that end up facing off against each other, two teams that, for all the struggles that Tennessee had during the regular season, especially at home, like, no one doubts that they have national title talent, right? So, I think both sides of that equation are a little bit frustrated that, some of these other teams got what's on paper relatively good draws in super regionals with upset winners and things like that. And yet Tennessee, Arkansas is on this weekend. Yeah. Tennessee obviously, kind of felt like they got pushed by Wake and they had to play an extra game, but it felt like in some ways that extra game is almost helped them because the atmosphere was so good. Mm-hmm. And you had big moments with Liam Doyle on the mound and the energy was so high. And so maybe I'm buying a little too much into that, but it felt like almost like that extra game just was, for the vibes, was kind of helpful in some ways. So now I'm like, Tennessee feels like they're playing pretty well. You like the talent there, but you're also being asked to go on the road, to go to Fayetteville and win 2 out of 3 on the road against an Arkansas team that just kind of ho-hum waltzed its way through their own regional. So where do you come down on this? Is the home field too much to where it's just tough to pick against Arkansas? For full disclosure, I did pick Arkansas in our picks. Or do you feel like Tennessee maybe is cresting at a point that they could take advantage and win this thing?
Yeah. These are certainly two of the most talented teams left. If you're going to, like what we talked about, you just talent, regardless of fit and chemistry and all that other jazz, right? They would be 1 and 2 or 3, 4. I think that's as low as you would go. Yeah. And so there's a couple of dynamics here. One, absolutely, I felt like Monday night with what Tennessee did was an incredible moment for a program, especially with the home kind of struggles. They lost all those home series that people like us kept reminding them about. And for them to come out on Monday and be able to have that great moment at home in front of the fan base, I think that was cathartic, if anything else. Similarly, Arkansas, you might recall, has lost on the way to Omaha at home in their last 3 opportunities. When they made it, they won on the road. So they played great this weekend. Probably played as well. They were as dominant as any team, especially on the mound. I feel like they should be confident facing Tennessee, considering, it was a great series, but they just won, 3 weeks ago against the same team. Handed Liam Doyle his worst outing of his career, probably, certainly of this year. So that is a fascinating storyline as well, with Doyle coming back to the scene of the crime where he got roughed up against a really good lineup. What does that look like? Because he's gonna be jacked up. I mean, he's jacked up. Just hey, he's sitting there watching TV and you change the channel. He's excited, right? I mean, it doesn't take anything to get him riled up. Well, he's got a good reason now. So he's gonna be. I mean, that should be just incredible. And he's gonna face that lineup that's, that can make anyone look bad, and they did. So for me, I picked Arkansas as well. And if the game were in Knoxville, if the series were in Knoxville, I would probably pick Tennessee. That's kind of how that broke down, just playing the odds. And I do feel like the winner of this game or series is going to be in really good shape once they get to Omaha, because they're just going to be one of the most talented teams left. The other thing I'd point out here, Gage Wood was really good. Gabe Gackle, has moved into that relief ace role, and he's been really good. What does that look like against the Tennessee offense? We've talked about Doyle and Marcus Phillips and those guys having to face that vaunted Razorback lineup, but Tennessee's swinging it pretty well too, and that is another subplot. What kind of games do we get? Do we get the 4-3 game, or do we get the 8-7 game? Because I do feel like they're going to be close. It's just what does it look like on the scoreboard?
Arkansas, one of the rare teams that their pitching depth has gotten better as the season has gone on, just given that they've gotten some guys back from injury. Gage Wood, one of them. Parker Coyle pitched well in game 1 of the regional, and he's a guy who's missed significant time. So it does feel like they've kind of, and with Gabe Gackle moving back to the bullpen, like it feels like that's added some depth, even though it's not an added player, but you now have him in the right spot.
You're getting more out of him.
Yeah. It is a Saturday, Sunday, Monday super regional. This is, so that feels a little bit, both teams derive an advantage from it. Obviously from the Liam Doyle perspective, given that he came in and pitched Monday, it gives him an extra day to get back to where they want him to get, whether he pitches in game 1 or game 2. And then from the Arkansas standpoint, they started Aiden Jimenez in the opener of the regional. Now with it a Saturday, Sunday, Monday super regional, you can just skip right to Zach Root and go from there. And then Jimenez might be the kind of guy where it's like, we're not going to be afraid to use him in one of the first couple of games of the series, but if we get to game 3, he's an option to start. That might kind of be the way they approach that thing. Beidel-Shees is probably the same in the same boat. I have a feeling that the winner of this, whether we agree with it or not, I don't know. I'd have to think about it, but the winner of this super regional, I kind of think goes into Omaha as the betting favorite to win the national title. I kind of feel like it. Arkansas obviously has the top seed left. They have the numbers and the stats and the depth and all that stuff. And in Tennessee, I think it would largely just be based on like defending national champions, famous program, people, when it comes to betting on, sometimes it's not necessarily just the data. It's also just the aura of a program. And Tennessee certainly has that going for it right now, as they should. So that one's going to be fun. Patrick Ebert will be there on hand for that one, covering it all weekend in Fayetteville. Should be fantastic atmosphere, fantastic games. There's not going to be a more talented super regional, that's for darn sure. So that'll be a lot of fun. All right, let's talk Auburn. Okay. I was there for that weekend. Pretty comprehensive, similar to Arkansas. There was really no moment where I felt like Arkansas wasn't in total control here. Some of the scores look relatively close. Central Connecticut State gave them a good run on Friday, but there didn't feel like there was any jeopardy in that game, at least from where I was sitting. And then, of course, in the regional final against NC State, they just ran away with it. NC State was out of gas. So a relatively light weekend for Auburn. They looked really good. The offense was great. The freshmen kind of led the way, honestly. Bub Terrell was the MVP of the regional. That's obviously good news there. They pitched really well. Cam Tilley did not in his start against Central Connecticut, but they made up for it, and Dutton pitched well. Andreas Alvarez pitched well in the regional final. Christian Chatterton didn't even pitch just because they didn't have the innings for him, frankly.
Yeah, he would have been the Monday guy. Yeah.
Right. He would have started Monday, and they would have been in great shape with him on the mound on Monday. They've got good depth there. But they're taking on a Coastal Carolina team that I think is – like, I'm not saying this is a coin flip super regional necessarily. I'd still give advantage Auburn, but it's not going to be shocking if Coastal ends up winning this thing. They have an SEC level rotation. Jacob Morris, Cameron Flukie, those guys are both big-time prospects. Riley Eichhoff is not, but he is your classic veteran Sunday guy who just throws a bunch of strikes, and he's unflappable, and he's good enough. So Coastal's been in part because it's the Sun Belt, but just in general, like they've had the advantage on the mound in like every game they've played this year. But that's not just because they played in the Sun Belt. And they might have the starting pitching advantage in every game except the one Dutton starts, and even then you could probably have the debate. So that's going to be an interesting matchup. I don't think this is going to be a comfortable super regional for Auburn. That's just kind of my hunch. You'll be there, so I'm kind of curious on what your early impressions are.
Yeah, I think starting with Coastal, they've won 21 games in a row. And regardless
by the way, they're the hottest team in the country.
Regardless of who you're playing, everybody has clunkers, and they're still able to win those. And that I mean, it shows the consistency. It shows just a ability to get the clutch hits. You know, and we talked about some of the other teams that didn't do that this weekend, and you just have to tip your cap. It will be a challenge, though, for them to handle Plainsman Park. This is why Auburn renovated their stadium for moments like this. Here it is, a chance they're going to have 7,000+ people in there. They're going to have, it's going to be really loud. They're going to have all the vibes and the aura and everything that goes into being able to win your way to Omaha on your home field in the year that you invest all this in your program. Is the team good enough? We're going to find out. Coastal's really good. It's a quality opponent, and we're going to find out if Auburn's lineup that has been, especially at home, they've been really good. They swept LSU. They won a series over Vandy. Alabama. They've been really good at Plainsman Park. And for me, if that lineup, if they're able to handle Coastal's pitching and turn this into 8-7 instead of 3-2. It's advantage Auburn, and it's not that Auburn can't win the low scoring games, but I think their offense is better suited to put up more crooked numbers, and I feel like if they're able to do that against that vaunted Coastal staff that has incredible numbers, then that's more of their ballywick there. I think the other thing I would point out is Cam Tilley might be their most talented pitcher. He, as you said, he didn't pitch well. Does he bounce back? And don't know starting rotation, and Carson Myers pitched well. Maybe you go with him instead. I don't know. But they need more out of Tilley because he's just so talented. He can be a difference maker. And then the other part of that is, Ike Irish, he's been second half of the year, really since he came back from the injury, has been probably the SEC's best hitter. I mean, he's been in the discussion anyway. And big moment like this, it'll be his. He's going to be a high draft choice, so this will be his last time to play it in front of the home crowd. What does that look like? Do you press? Do you not do what you've done all year, or is this just your crowning achievement where you add to your legacy, right? And I feel like those are just fascinating storylines as we head into the weekend there.
Yeah, I think this is one where there is going to be more talent on the field in Fayetteville. This one, though, might be one of the more cleaner played regionals. Mm-hmm. Both teams good defensively. Coastal is – I was talking to a scout at the Sun Belt tournament, and his big thing about Coastal was just that, they make every routine play. They go first to third on every single. They go second to home on every single. They get all their bunts down. Mm-hmm. Like it's not going to be a sloppy thing. And Auburn is much the same. They tend to be pretty clean. So this should be well played. But I think you're right. I think the big thing is like Coastal's not designed to play catch up. It's just not that kind of offense this year. They've got some talented hitters, but they're not. That's not the type of game they want to play. Yeah. They want to get out ahead and salt the game away because they do have a good bullpen as well. But they want to get ahead and be able to just kind of keep you at an arm's distance. Mark, LSU having to survive Little Rock is one of the strangest things I think I've ever seen happen. I don't mean to be disrespectful to Little Rock, but there was nothing about their season and their stats and the result, like none of it suggested that they would put up any resistance in the regional, much less against LSU. Right. And yet they not only play well with LSU, they like blow them out in the first regional final. Mm-hmm. And if you want to say LSU was flat, like, okay, fine, but still. And then they came back on Monday, and I kind of thought, okay, all right, well, that was cute, but now LSU is going to be mad, and they're going to be motivated, and the crowd's going to be on top of them, and all of that was true, and yet Little Rock was still right there.
Yeah,
So,
they
like,
led 5-0.
Yeah. So, like, and then once LSU took the lead, it's not like, okay, yes, it got away from a little bit in the last inning, but up until then, it was a 1-run game in the eighth, and like, so credit Little Rock that like they didn't really fold up at any point, and I did not see that coming, but LSU survives it. So yeah, first was kind of your reactions to that, and then they've got West Virginia, a very good team, but you certainly like that matchup for LSU going into bringing West Virginia into Alec Box. But there's also the flip side of, like, obviously if Little Rock is playing with them that way, like, West Virginia can too. So there's just a lot there. But I just found that regional so fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, LSU had their backs against the wall, and they, to their credit, they were able to make enough plays, and like Kason Evans was incredible. Coming out of the pen on Monday, and he had double-digit strikeouts and pitched, 7 innings or so in relief. Was it Fry that had the big game? I mean, Little Rock couldn't pitch to him. I mean, it was just everything that came in, it was going out a lot harder. And I love it when a team is, their backs are against the wall and they really need somebody to step forward, and someone does, right? And that's what decides the game, as opposed to a mistake, or guys don't throw strikes and it ends up being a walkathon like we saw in Oxford. I feel like those are the stories we want to tell, and certainly LSU, they had their backs against the wall, they had some adversity, and they were able to push through it. However, it is concerning that you don't handle a team that finished 6th out of 8th in the OVC and had a losing overall record. And granted, they were playing really well and they were hot, at the end, but the talent differential gives you pause that, okay, so LSU is going to play a more talented team in West Virginia this week. It is at home. It is a super regional format, which certainly fits LSU much better, because you can throw Cade Anderson and you can throw Anthony Ianson, and you got to beat one of those two, right? And then game 3, if Kason Evans pitched the way he did, he's right there with them, right? I don't know what it looks like after those 3, because Zach Cowan hasn't been good. Chase Shores is not throwing enough strikes. There's some holes there. And this has not been an LSU offense that's just been able to bash people. They've had moments, but it has not been a consistently, top of the SEC offense. And they're going to play a West Virginia team that absolutely, will fight you. They beat Kentucky. They basically played the Spider-Man meme with Kentucky. They just went back and forth at each other. Not a lot of difference. 2 one-run games. Either one could have gone either way. One low scoring, one high scoring. So not a fun team to play. They're going to put pressure on you. They're going to take advantage of your free bases you give them, those sorts of things. So if I'm an LSU team that has known to have trouble finding the zone, I think that's concerning for me, just from what I saw from West Virginia this weekend. I think the other part to keep in mind is, okay, so LSU has this great home field advantage. You're going to have this talent advantage. You're going to have a coach who's won it all versus West Virginia's first-year coach. Granted, he's having a great year, but still, there's a difference in experience level there. You have all these advantages. What can you do with them? And if it doesn't go well, early in the game, are you pressing? Are you thinking, oh man, what's going on here? Because I felt like that's what I was seeing. It was like I wasn't there, but it certainly appeared as that weekend went on against Little Rock, and you lose that first game and you drop behind in the second game. the poker factor was high. It just seemed like they were fighting it a little bit to get something going. And I would be concerned if you fall behind early, right? And granted, if you got Kate Anderson, I would assume throwing game one, he can be an anecdote to that, right? And keep that from ever being a problem. But if it does, I would, yeah, I feel like that's where some of the mental part of this sport can catch up with the Tigers.
Yeah, that's going to be, I think, two things. One is that if Anderson and Ianson pitch up to their capabilities, then that's probably it. That's probably all there is to it.
Taps, yeah,
right. But you're right that there is an interesting piece of this if West Virginia is able to get something done early, because the other side is that as a pitching staff, West Virginia doesn't allow a lot of home runs. They tend to try to work in ground balls. Now, granted, also some of that is because of where they play. It's cold for a long time in Morgantown, so maybe that's depressing some of those numbers a little bit. But still, like the inclination, and we'll talk about Ole Miss shortly, and I think this was part of it for Ole Miss. The inclination of so many of these SEC teams when they get in trouble is to just try to home run your way out of it.
Yeah.
And that can work, right? Like we've seen teams do that. But when it doesn't work, it looks really bad because you're swinging over the ball and you're swinging out of your shoes and you're hitting, you're trying to pull balls in the outside corner and you're rolling over to second base. It's like, and so does that start to happen, to your point, if they do get down, try to do too much, you're trying to hit a ball 400 feet rather than just get on base and go from there. West Virginia's pitching staff is going to be willing to give up some hits, but they're going to try to keep the ball in the yard. And how well they do that, I think will have a lot to do with how competitive they are. But the biggest factor to me is just if Anderson and Ianson are on, it's pretty hard to imagine West Virginia won't do much about it.
Especially if they go deep in the game and you don't need as much from whoever's going to follow them.
Yeah,
right? I think that's key, because if it's 3-2 in the eighth and Anderson's at pitch count, what do you do? Do you go to Evans and try to just, anyway, that to me is the scary part. Another scary part if I'm the Tigers right
now. And believe it or not, folks, that is all of the SEC super regional teams. There's 4 of them, but 2 of them are playing each other. So the max 3 teams in Omaha. Yep. And it should be said, perspective is important here. If 3 get in, so you're guaranteed 1. And both LSU and Auburn are favorites.
Yeah, they're at
I
home.
would say, right. So if you get 3 as a league, like I still think, especially given the regional weekend, like that's a pretty decent outcome to get 3. And not so long ago, people, we get ready for Omaha and people would be like, oh, wow, 3 teams from one conference. That's really, so we've just gotten so accustomed though to, 4 teams, and last year it was 4 and 4 from 2 different conferences. And I think we got a little ahead of our skis in thinking that was the new normal. When in reality, maybe there were also some breaks that happened last year that if we go back and look now, we can see that maybe at the time we didn't realize. But regardless, that is it for the SEC and super regional teams. We're not going to necessarily go through every last team and their regional result, but there were some interesting ones. I think we got to start with Ole Miss. Yeah. Loses the opener to Murray State, and look, history is littered with examples of the 4 putting all their chips on the table in game 1, knocking off the host, and then 2 things happen. One is the talent for the host team eventually wins out, and they come all the way back, and then that 4 seed pretty quickly runs out of steam. Yeah. As the bracket continues. That did not happen. Murray State continued to play well. Ole Miss did do its part to get back to the regional final, which was impressive in its own right. They had to outlast a Georgia Tech team trying to extend Danny Hall's coaching career. So they got back to it, but then in the final, they get to Monday, and if you're really interested in like a pretty detailed, granular breakdown of it, our buddy Chase Parham did a podcast, on his podcast network the other day, just kind of really getting into it on a granular level, and so that was really, really good if you're interested in that level of it. But for me, it was just the simple fact of you got down by too much too early in that Murray State game,
Mm-hmm.
and something that Murray's Ole Miss fans have pointed to is that Walker Hooks was probably just in that game too long.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we're never going to know the counterfactual, but it's hard to disagree. Like Murray was kind of all over him after the first inning. And then I think the bigger thing, though, was just that it was some of the things about Ole Miss's season that made them frustrating that cropped up again at the absolute wrong time.
Yeah.
So it was, a bunch of strikeouts. Yes, they hit some home runs, but it was a whole bunch of strikeouts. And some of them came at really crucial times, including in the ninth inning. Also, the defense wasn't particularly clean, and not just in terms of errors. There were early on in that game, there was several infield singles that just got maybe not played well. Not errors so much, but just didn't get played well.
Just a step slow, repeatedly. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the ultimate backbreaker is that at the time you didn't know if it was going to matter, but a Judd Utermark error at second base brings a run home to make it 12-3. And you're like, well, that's probably not going to matter. It's 12-3. Mm-hmm. Well, they lose 12-11. Yeah. So, that's not to put it on Judd Utermark, obviously, because a lot of players, came up short for Ole Miss in that game. Now they made the crazy comeback, this Herculean effort to get within one. And I don't know about you, Mark, but when they made it 12-11 in the eighth, I was like, well, I've seen this movie before, and I know exactly how it ends. And I'm sorry, Murray State, but you're not going to be on the right side of this one.
All right.
And then sure enough, they were. So I wasn't, if you'd have told me before that game, Murray State wins, I don't think I would have been that shocked. Like that team is good. Not more talented than Ole Miss, but they are good. They play really good defense. Clearly they can hit. And they, for the most part, threw strikes. But if you'd have kind of laid it out for me and that, okay, Murray's going to get a big lead and then Ole Miss is going to start chipping away. They go to some of their big guns on the pitching staff. I was going to say in the bullpen, but it was actually like Maddox and Nichols that kind of got things going back in the right direction. Then I'd have been like, oh, okay, yeah. Ole Miss comes back. They win that game. They just kind of like escape by the skin of their teeth. So the fact that happened and Murray State held on, that's the part that shocks me, was that Murray State was able to just hold on once Ole Miss got going, because it just seemed so inevitable. Once the ball started leaving the yard, and especially once Braden Randall left the yard, I was like, well, this is a foregone conclusion. It wasn't. Murray State wins it, and now they're going to have a super regional about, I don't know, half an hour from my house.
Yeah.
At Coombs Field at Duke, a very different environment than Swayze.
No doubt.
No disrespect to Duke and Coombs Field, but that is not going to be quite as electric as Swayze was. But regardless, Mark, your takeaways on the end of Ole Miss's season.
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts. One, during that, I guess that massive inning where they really started to come back, Ole Miss did, and there were a lot of walks in there. And then, but they had two runners on, and they had Furness and Utermark up, and they both K'd. Right. I thought that was their opportunity to, come all the way back to have that big inning or bigger inning. That, in hindsight, those were two. You can't K there. Those were two. And to your point, it certainly looked like, there were there were not two strike approaches, we'll call it. There were 2,000 feet approaches. I think would be the logical counter to that. The other thing that I'm sure Mike Bianco is second guessing himself is his game one starter, not throwing Hunter Elliott. He threw Riley Maddox, and of course hindsight's 2020, right? But I didn't hate the move, but when it doesn't go well, you open yourself up to all the second guessing and always throw your best guy and all of this thing that's easy to do after the fact. I certainly don't blame him for doing it. Maybe I do the same thing. I don't know, but it was when you lose that 1-4 game, and everyone from you and me and everyone else was saying this is going to be a hard 1-4 game. There were some out there that didn't project as 1-4 that ended up being fairly close. But I think we all felt like this was going to be a dogfight, and it was, and it was worse than that because Ole Miss couldn't, they didn't pitch well enough in that game. So that's one of those that sticks with you during the off season, and as you're, especially with the way that Ole Miss rallied to come back through the losers bracket, you had enough pitching until Monday, and I guess you were able to win anyway. But those were two things that really stood out to me. That, and yeah, you're right. I think in our internal chat, when we were watching all this, Ole Miss, it just seemed like all those infield hit, it wasn't hard hit balls. It was just balls in the right place, or the shift wasn't in a position where the player could get to it, or he didn't break, with enough urgency or assertiveness or whatever to end up getting the out. And all that just continued to accumulate into just this massive deficit that was, in the end, ended up being just one run too much.
Yeah, and an interesting offseason ahead for Ole Miss because they're losing a lot. I mean, that was their whole thing with this team, was that the experience, not just in terms of portal guys, Isaac Humphrey and Sanford and Mormon, but the guys who came back, Elliott and Maddox and Nichols, guys who were on the national title team, like it was just an old, tough team that outperformed, frankly, at least in my opinion, outperformed their talent level because they just were so tough and old. Well, the flip side of that is that now most of those guys are either out of eligibility or going to get drafted. Not everybody, but a good deal of them. And so it's like, what do they do in the portal this offseason? Because the reality is you're going to have to probably go into the portal pretty extensively to get it done. And we'll see if this ends up looking like I hate to use the phrase dead cat kit because that implies that it's not going to be good moving forward. It might be, but does this look like a kind of a high point followed by a little bit of a retool, or are they going to go out and crush it in the portal? Because frankly, they did crush it in the portal last year. All those guys I just mentioned were great. On top of Will McCausland, for example, as a portal guy, like great find. So it worked out. But this is the what we've talked about. When you get in that portal that way, especially when you have a year when you also lose some program guys, you have to keep doing that. And that's hard. Just ask, Kentucky, it didn't work as well this past year. Now there were a lot of reasons for that. It didn't work as well this past year as it did the 2 years prior, and that's just the way it goes.
Yeah. And that is a decision each coaching staff has to make, right? Or do you bring in the older guys to plug in the quote ready-made? At least you have more confidence based on their track record that they're going to be able to have success at this level, versus an unknown, a younger player who might be more talented but is not there yet. And where ideally you want some of both, but it's harder to get guys to come in without a guarantee of playing time in today's world because they have so many opportunities. And that's going to be fascinating because Ole Miss isn't alone here. There are a lot of teams whose rosters, as we start to go through and look at what they're going to bring in the summer and what they need to bring in, all those kind of started that work now. And just looking at it, there's a lot of rosters that are going to flip. And you throw in, if we do have the house settlement and you have a smaller roster cap, you're going to see quite a bit of churn in these rosters, and people are going to have to be more selective, and you're going to have to hit on a higher percentage of the players that you bring in because you just have, with fewer roster spots, you have less room for error.
And oh, by the way, true rebuilding years where you just go into the season knowing we're up against it, and if we're really lucky we make the tournament, you're not allowed those anymore in the SEC. Like there are some teams, right? Like Carrick Jackson has been given the time by their administration to be young and now to try to get older because they understand the deal. Kentucky, to some degree, I think probably gets maybe not now because they made 3 straight tournaments, but probably gets some special dispensation to do that kind of thing. But that might be the end of the list in terms of programs that are willing to turn in a 10-20 just because they're young.
And the expectations have changed because the money has changed. Okay, one, you're paying what you're paying your coaches. You're going to pay them this much. You need some sort of return, but also the NIL money, and you have all of your big money people who are funding that. And if they aren't getting return on their investment, that just ratchets up the pressure even more. So it's, you want to come to this league because you're going to have all the resources you have to be successful, but it is so unforgiving if you have a run of injuries or underperformance, or you just have clunkers at the wrong time and it costs you. I feel like that's the give and take. Hey, I want this high pressure, lucrative job to set me up financially and all those great things that are enticing, but it's not without it's peril if things don't go well.
Let's kind of speed round through the rest of everything else, Mark. Let's do it this way. I'll kind of go through the results of the other teams. I'll pick out a couple if you want to pick out a couple that kind of interest you in terms of, because we'll have, as the offseason gets underway, we'll have time for the full postmortems on these teams, and we'll dive deeper into that kind of stuff. So we don't need to necessarily do it all now. But Texas, of course, just frankly got outplayed by UTSA. Like, I don't think there's really, in Jim Schlossnagle, to his credit, kind of said that in the post game when they got eliminated. Just like, that's a real team. This is not a 4 seed because they weren't a 4 seed, first of all, but this is not like just a fluky Cinderella thing that UTSA waltzed in here. Like, that team is just good. And they just outplayed Texas. Like, that's all there is to it. Scrolling further down, Georgia eliminated ultimately by Duke to lose that regional final. Well, Duke won the regional, I guess I should say, to win that one. So Georgia does not protect its home field there. Kentucky, a good run by Kentucky, gets to the regional final against West Virginia, as you mentioned. Back and forth game, nearly forced a Monday there, but couldn't quite get it done. But I guess my quick take there is that I think it was a great coaching job by Nick Mingione and his staff to get this team to a postseason and to play well there. They did some nice things with the roster, but this was not, especially compared to the previous 2 years, this was not as good a roster as those. And yet I think they deserve a lot of credit for getting back to the postseason with it. I don't mean that to be disrespectful to the players. They had talented players, but it wasn't what it was. But to get back to a regional is just kind of like a baseline is huge for that program. I don't think you can overstate that. Florida, boy, what a weekend it was for Florida. They end up they beat Fairfield in the elimination game, so there's that. But they got run off the field twice against East Carolina, a team that was just okay this year. Yeah. Like, not even, and really by ECU standards was not even okay. They were bad by ECU standards. But Florida just kind of felt like the injuries finally caught up with them. Was part of it. You mentioned they didn't get much from Peterson or Coppola. And I'll just say this because people will probably wonder why we didn't say anything. If we don't say anything, there was obviously the controversy with Kevin O'Sullivan there before their second game against East Carolina. And here's where I come down on this. Perhaps what the schedule change that got everybody upset with Florida, perhaps Florida was in the right there. And the NCAA site rep and the grounds crew, everybody else, whoever involved in that, was wrong. That being said, you cannot MF the grounds crew and Mark Scaff and the NCAA crew there in front of fans that are just milling around the stadium. You just can't do that. And so, look, maybe he had a good reason to be angry. I don't know. We weren't there. We don't know what all went down. But you just can't do that. You can express displeasure behind closed doors, because I guarantee you that happens at a lot of these regionals, because there's NCAA site reps that are trying to make all these pieces work, and there's late nights and rain and all that stuff. But you just have to have more tact than that. Yeah. And also, oh, by the way, just don't MF people like that. Come on. Like, especially those grounds crew guys, they're just trying to do what they need to do. And I just don't have a lot of patience for not treating people well. And that was not, regardless of how upset you are, that's not how you should treat people. It just point blank.
Yeah, there's an appropriate response for that situation. You were upset, the game changed, but handling it publicly, handling it, with vulgarity, with abrasiveness, bullying was the term used. Yeah, I'm sure Sully regrets that. So, how could he not? Right? That was a horrible look for him, and now this is something that's going to follow him. Right? So it's unacceptable. You can't do that, and he knows this. It's just kind of The other part of this is just understanding your role. I mean, you are representing a university. You're leading a program, the face of the program. There's a way to handle your business, and there's a way to step on and that's what he did. And that's that's what you have to avoid when you're in these roles. As we talked about, you get a lot of perks being a head coach at a university like Florida, but there's responsibility to come with it. And one of those responsibilities is not losing your freaking mind out in public, out in a situation that maybe called for this much response, and you gave them this much, and that's obviously just unacceptable in any form or fashion.
Agreed. And then of course Florida, you can understand where there was frustration because they just did not play well. And they get eliminated early there. Oklahoma in Chapel Hill gave UNC a pretty good run. Funny enough, did not play well in the Kyson Witherspoon start against Carolina, but played well in the regional final against Carolina. And then just ultimately Carolina was just too much on Monday. They just had more depth and just more quality. And that's kind of the way we saw it. There's a reason UNC is the number 5 overall seed. And then finally, not finally, there's a couple more left actually. Mississippi State eliminated in Tallahassee. Of course, it felt like everyone just kind of moved on from that, like in a positive way. Cause it was like, we got eliminated there, but here's this Brian O'Connor thing.
Yeah.
So obviously since we've last talked, Brian O'Connor officially named the head coach at Mississippi State. Coaching staff is coming together, mostly of guys that are coming with him from Virginia, but not entirely. There's a whole bunch of Virginia dudes in the portal. I think that's probably good news because talent was not the problem at Virginia last year. So they are going to be, I would assume Mississippi State's roster will look very different and will be very talented come the start of the 2026 season. Alabama 0-2 in Hattiesburg. Disappointing, but I don't think a lot to say there really. They got kind of a rough draw in that Southern Miss also lost on Friday. So they didn't even get to play against like Columbia's second wave of pitchers. They had to deal with Southern Miss right out of the gate,
who held their ace. Game.
Right. Yeah. They had to face Southern Miss and JB Middleton of all things. So they go 0-2. I don't know that as disappointing as that is. It's 0-4 in the last 2 years as a 2 seed. That's disappointing, but I think that was just pretty cut and dry. They just got beat a couple of times. And then Miami won the region, won the regional. So that opening loss doesn't look too terribly bad. And then of course, Vanderbilt, number 1 overall seed, doesn't get to a regional final. This felt eerily similar to 2 years ago when they were hosting and got eliminated by Xavier. And I believe that was like 2-1 or 3-1 or something along those lines. They are ultimately eliminated by Wright State, the 4 seed, a good 4 seed, sure, but getting eliminated by a 4 seed short of the regional final is never what you're looking to have happen there. And to your point, like it just kind of was the stuff we worried about all year that just circled back around at the worst time for the Commodores. So those are all the other results. Mark, feel free to cherry pick a couple of things if you'd like, and we'll get the folks out of here.
Well, Vandy, I mean, they had 11 hits in the 3 games combined. Okay, you're
probably not going to get it done.
Even if you pitch well, that's just not enough, right? And the only reason they won Friday is they had 3 home runs, and they all came in the 7th and 8th inning. And that was, if you're Vanderbilt, it's really frustrating based on how well they played during the last three or 4 weeks. So you just wonder, though. I mean, so much of what Vandy had done, or there were the clutch hits late, there were the grouping hits together, just the kind of things that when it's going well, it certainly lends itself to success, and eventually, though, that stuff slows down and you need something else, and it didn't occur for them. I think the other thing I would point out is Georgia. They had been so good all year at home, and they didn't throw enough strikes this weekend, and they didn't just crush people. They hit a few home runs, certainly in that Oklahoma State game. Homers are not the problem. It was they didn't pitch well enough, but that's been their attack. They're really suited to play in that ballpark, and they hit a bunch of home runs. And if they don't come, sometimes you have trouble, mounting enough offense. And that's got to be a disappointment for them. They were the 7 overall seed and not even make the regional final. They needed more from the pitching staff, but also just ways to score other than bully ball. The other thing I'll point out is Alabama. They 2 really tight games, and the Cade Snell almost home run against Miami that would have changed everything. Maybe they get a little wind gust at that point, or he pulls it a little bit more, all those what ifs, all right, those kinds of things. And then in the other one, they had a 2-run lead in the 8th inning with the NCAA saves leader on the mound and couldn't get it done. And that's, you'd like your chances, right? With Snell at the plate in that situation, and he hits the ball really well. And then the other one with Hosmer with a lead late in the game, you probably take that. But both times, and in both chances, it didn't work out. When I guess the follow up there is they were better this year in year 2 under Vaughn than they were last year. I think last year they kind of limped to the finish line, and they weren't really that good at the end of the year, even though they made a regional. This year, I felt like they took a step. They won 40-something games. They were more consistent. They didn't have the midweek losses, all those kinds of things that it showed how program is evolving. The next thing they've got to do is they've got to have some postseason success, and that'll be what is Alabama. They're another team is going to be rebuilding a lot of their roster just from guys moving on, and what is that? What does their team look like? They've got a centerpiece in Justin LeBron to build around, who will be one of the faces of the sport next year. What else do they do in year 3 in Vaughn's tenure? Who, by the way, just got a contract extension that who knows, but that would, I guess, conceivably keep him at Alabama for longer. In today's world, you never really know, but certainly you have to like the trajectory of where he's taken the Alabama program.
Yeah, I think that's right. They are interesting to me from a couple of standpoints. One is that there were scenarios where it didn't end like this, and by that I mean, if A&M makes a different decision regarding Michael Early, Rob Vaughn is going to be a candidate at A&M, and maybe he doesn't get the job, but he would have been a candidate there, and maybe Alabama's in the coaching search, right?
Yeah.
But I think going into next year, one of the interesting things to watch, and I'm not putting it on Justin LeBron because clearly he was not the problem really at any point, but he did only hit 252 in SEC play this year.
Yeah. Struck out a lot. He struck out a lot. For
the first 3 weeks of the season, there was literally no one better in the country. And it looked like he was going to run away with the Golden Spikes. And it just didn't play out that way for whatever reason. I'm sure there will be time to explore that, but to be their peak, though, they're going to need Justin LeBron to be that guy he was for the first 3 weeks through an entire season, because he's that kind of talent. He has that kind of ability, and they needed that. And maybe this season goes a little bit different. If he's the same guy and he is a Golden Spikes winner, it's easy to see it being a totally different. I mean, they came close to hosting as it was. So, it wouldn't have really taken that much. So interesting offseason coming for them for sure. I'm with you on that. All right, Mark, quick recap real quick, just on logistics stuff. Mark will be in Auburn for the Super Regional, so he's got coverage there. I mentioned Patrick Ebert will be on hand in Fayetteville. He's got coverage there. Walt Villa will be in Baton Rouge covering that one. So we've got those SEC Super Regionals covered. I, meanwhile, will be here in Durham and Chapel Hill. No SEC involved there, but when a guy gets a chance to sleep in his own bed, Super Regional weekend, right before spending 2 weeks in Omaha, you're going to take advantage of that 10 out of 10 times.
Yeah.
So I will be taking in Arizona and UNC along with Duke and Murray State. Aaron Fitt and I kind of tag teaming those two Super Regionals. So I'll have coverage there, but we'll have everything covered. We'll have a D1 baseball staffer at every Super Regional this weekend. So plenty of coverage wall to wall, in addition to some folks who are going to be at home who are going to be doing some different types of coverage. So we'll have you covered for Super Regional weekend. All right. Want to thank our sponsors for this and every Highway to Hoover, Academy Sports and Outdoors, and Tecovas Boots. Want to thank Mark, as always, for joining me, and thank you, the listeners, for listening. We'll talk to y'all soon. Enjoy Super Regional weekend. We'll be back with you ahead of Omaha about this time next week.